Today, we're basically diving into an academic detective story. It's a hunt for something you would think is everywhere, the actual research that's supposed to tell companies how to keep us safe when we travel for work. But what one researcher found, or maybe more accurately, what they didn't find, well, that's the real story.
I mean, think about it. It's a huge question, right? Millions of people are flying around for work all the time, and companies have a legal and moral duty to keep them safe. So they write these policies, they create procedures, but what are those policies actually based on? Is it real, hard data, or is it something else?
And at first glance, the answer seems pretty obvious. You do a quick search on an academic site like Google Scholar for business travel risk, and bam, over 2.5 million results. It looks like a total ocean of information. You'd think, okay, yeah, with all this content, this field is totally covered. But as we're about to see, not all search results are what they seem. Now, what if I told you that when a researcher got super specific, looking for the exact phrase business travel risk management, the whole shebang, that massive number of 2.5 million plummeted to just 3. Yeah, you heard me, 3. And that huge gap is the first clue in our mystery. So this whole thing kicked off with a 2020 study from the University of Leicester. A researcher set out to answer what seemed like a pretty straightforward question. What are the main risk management factors for private security in business travel? But to find the answer, they didn't just type a few words into a search bar, oh no. They did something way, way more intense. They used a method called a systematic literature review. And you should think of this less like a search and more like a full-blown forensic investigation. It's this super structured 10-step process designed to find every single relevant piece of research on a topic, check its quality, and then pull it all together without any bias. It's basically the gold standard for figuring out what we actually know about something. So with this powerful method, the researcher casts a super wide net. And just like we saw, that first batch of results was just overwhelming. At this point, it still looked like a massive ocean of information, way more than enough to work with. And this really gives you a sense of the scale of that ocean. Broad terms like business travel risk, you get millions of hits. Even when you start adding more keywords like management, you're still looking at over 1.7 million documents. It is the classic needle in a haystack problem, and there is no way you can read the entire haystack. So how in the world do you find that needle? You can't read millions of articles. You need a better tool. You need a detective's toolkit, one that's designed to filter out all that noise and find the real signal. And this is where the whole investigation gets really clever. And just to be clear, this wasn't some casual skim of the results. The researcher followed a meticulous 10-step process. They planned the search, they screened thousands of titles and abstracts, and they rigorously checked the quality of every single paper before even thinking about putting it all together. This level of detail is absolutely crucial for what happens next. Okay, so here's the secret weapon, the technology. Instead of a simple keyword search, the researcher used software that does what's called a semantic search. Here's the difference. A standard search finds any document that just mentions your words. A semantic search is way smarter. It finds documents that are actually about your topic. It's the difference between hearing a bunch of noise and actually finding the conversation. And here is the result of that tech in action. Just look at the difference. On the left, you've got the millions of results from the standard search. And on the right, that's what the advanced tool Devon Agent found. Millions of articles have been boiled down to just a few dozen papers that are actually relevant. The haystack has literally vanished, leaving behind only the needles. So, after all this painstaking filtering, after using this advanced technology to slice through all that noise and find only the highest quality, most relevant academic literature, what was left? This right here is the climax of our detective story. Zero, zilch, nothing. After all that work, the super advanced semantic search for the most important phrases, business travel risk and business travel risk management, returned 0 high-quality, relevant academic studies. The room wasn't just tidy, it was completely, totally empty. And hey, don't just take my word for it. The study's author, Tony Ridley, put it right there in the abstract. He said there is, and I quote, a surprising lack of empirical and academic literature that informs how we actually do business travel risk management. The foundation that everyone just assumed was there, it just wasn't. Now, here's the crucial part. It's not that nothing had ever been written about related topics.
The real problem was that all the knowledge was completely fragmented, scattered to the winds. You had some bits and pieces over in tourism studies, some other parts in human geography, a little more in urban studies, but there was no single unified body of research focused specifically on business travel risk.
So, what do you do when you're an explorer and you find a giant blank space on the map? Well, you have to start drawing the map yourself, right? Faced with this huge research gap, the author had no choice but to start building a brand new framework from the ground up. And this flowchart from the study, this is basically a picture of that process. The researchers started pulling together all those scattered clues from different fields, from mobility, from studies about place, cities, crime, and began weaving them together into a coherent structure for the very first time. And one of the coolest parts of this new map is a really simple but powerful idea. The framework organizes all the potential risks into two big buckets. First, you have mobility risks. These are the dangers you face when you're moving, like on the flight or in a taxi. And second, you have fixity risks. These are dangers tied to a specific place, like the city you're in, or a neighborhood known to be a crime hotspot.
Okay, so an academic research gap is interesting stuff for academics, but why does this actually matter in the real world? Well, the implications are actually huge, both for companies and for any of us who travel for work.
So here's the bottom line. First, it means that corporate travel policies might be built more on gut feelings and old habits than on actual evidence. Second, a lot of security advice is probably just borrowed from the tourism industry. But let's be real, a business traveler faces very different risks than a tourist on vacation. But there's good news. This new mobility versus fixity framework gives every single traveler a new tool to assess their own risk. And maybe most importantly, this whole discovery is a giant flashing sign that says we desperately need new, focused research in this area. Which brings us right back to the beginning. The map for business travel safety, the one we all just assumed was finished and hanging on the wall, is actually just being drawn right now. And that forces every company and every one of us to ask a pretty tough question. What map have we been following all this time? And is it really leading us in the safest direction?